45 years after he attempted to abduct a 16-year-old girl at Lake Macquarie, a convicted rapist has been jailed for at least 1 year and 3 months. But due to time already served, 64-year-old Warren McCorriston is a free man tonight, out on parole.
I have a knife. Get into my car. I want to talk. That was the chilling threat made by this man, Warren McCorriston, more than 4 decades ago. Words a 16-year-old girl would never forget.
Are you sorry for what you did?
Only charged in 2024 and having since pleaded guilty to 1 count of detained for advantage, today the 64-year-old walked free.
That clip was from an NBN Television news report on the 26th of June 2025 and gave a brief but fairly good summary of the sentencing of Warren McCorriston that occurred on that day, as well as a little bit about the 1980 offence that he was sentenced for. Now, the actual news report did go on and give a little bit more detail and background to Warren McCorriston and the offences he had committed in the past and how he came to the attention of the police and Strikeforce Arapaima, which I have covered in my previous videos, so won't go into that again here. So in this video, I will give a more comprehensive coverage of what occurred with his sentencing and his parole and conditions, and a little bit more about his 1980 offences. So there was a bit more detail in the media this time. And I'll also cover some other related matters, including the pending charges that still have to be heard in Queensland. So, Warren McCorriston's sentencing on that day did receive a lot of media coverage, including being mentioned on the front page of the Coast Bulletin on the 27th of June 2025. And that was the only newspaper report that I saw which did have it on the front page. Not even the Newcastle Herald did. But anyway, here we go. Ex-Q1 Body Corp boss sentenced. Now, he also previously managed Daydream Island Resort, so he was a fairly high-up executive type of person. Now, the Q1 building, it's a residential tower on the Gold Coast and is the 2nd tallest building in the Southern Hemisphere. But anyway, going on with the article. The former body corporate manager for the Gold Coast's tallest tower has been sentenced after admitting an historic attempt to abduct a teen girl 40 years ago. Now, actually, it was 45 years ago, being 1980, when he was 18. Now, some of the other reports do say 19, and I assume that's because he was born in 1961 and they're simply thinking, well, 1980, he would have been 19. But as the offence occurred earlier in the year, and most reports do seem to say he was 18, I would expect he probably was 18 and just turned 19 later in 1980. Okay, I'll continue. Ex-Q1 body corporate boss Warren McCorriston, now 64, initially didn't remember attempting to abduct the teen, but a psychologist noted he came to accept he committed the offences after reading the evidence. And it then says report page 7, which I'll get back to a bit later in this video. Now I did find it a little shocking to read that he couldn't remember it, but accepts he did it, I would think someone would remember doing something like that. And only could be other reasons, but the only reasons I can think of someone mightn't is if at the time they just accepted it was normal behaviour and didn't really think too much of it. But it could be that, or it could have been that it was just one of many attempted abductions that he may have tried to carry out and just couldn't remember that particular incident. But either way, it's a bit odd. So on that note that perhaps this was just one of many, and that would assume that there are other incidents we don't know about, I have had a couple of women contact me who do allege around that same time period that they believe it was Warren McCorriston attempted to abduct them. So these are just allegations. Now, their descriptions of the incidents do seem fairly similar to the case described here. And police are aware of those incidents, but I believe the women chose not to take it any further because they didn't want him to know who they were, and I assume that's just out of fear. But anyway, I should add that these are simply allegations, and it is always possible it may not have been him, but it does make you wonder. I would also note that Warren McCorriston was acquitted in 1981 of an attempted rape charge that was alleged to have occurred in March 1980. So pretty much around the same time as this attempted abduction. But before I get back to Warren McCorriston's sentencing for these current charges, I would like to mention his brother, David. And because on the 26th of June, when Warren McCorriston was being sentenced in Newcastle court, David McCorriston also had a hearing in Newcastle court. This is in relation to the recent offences I've mentioned about him. And since my last video, I have come across one other media report that did provide some more details about these offences. This was reported in the Daily Telegraph on the 31st of May 2025. Pedophile's new crimes. Convicted pedophile and inmate David McCorriston has admitted to the abuse of a 13-year-old boy more than 3 decades ago. The 60-year-old Belmont man groomed the young boy after they met through a friend in late 1989. Police facts detailed that McCorriston, then in his 20s, so if he's 60 now, 1989's 36 years ago, so yeah, he would have been mid-20s, so that adds up, took the victim to the local baths where he would sexually abuse the boy before offering to buy him an ice cream and saying, "Nobody needs to know." In Newcastle local court this week, the 60-year-old pleaded guilty to 13 charges. Yeah, so it was just a brief report there. At least it is good to hear that he has pleaded guilty for his crimes, even if it's just for the sake of the victim not having to go through it all in court. But anyway, getting back to Warren, I did mention in my last video that I did believe there may have been a court suppression on mentioning his name for his appearance in court. And it turns out this was the case, and I'll discuss this a bit more later in the video. But I'll now go over the media report that led me to believe this. And this was reported on the 12th of May, 2025, in an article on ABC News, which was online. Court documents reveal moment 17-year-old girl fought off kidnapper near Newcastle. Court documents have revealed the terrifying moment a 17-year-old girl narrowly she was 16, but anyway, narrowly avoided being abducted from near her New South Wales home 45 years ago. Last month, which would have been April, a 64-year-old man pleaded guilty to attempting to abduct the woman with the intention of having sexual contact with her. Prior to the plea, the man, referred to by the pseudonym WM, using the pseudonym is what made me think his name was being suppressed, but using his initials as a pseudonym, it's not really hard to actually figure out who it is if you're following the story. And for the rest of this article, when WM's mentioned, I'll just say his name. So he was set to face trial next week. In agreed facts tendered to Newcastle District Court, Warren McCorriston admitted to detaining the teenage girl for advantage at Gateshead, south of Newcastle, when he was 19. I think it was actually 18. The agreed facts stated the woman got off a bus near her house after going to the movies in Newcastle to see the film 10. Now, some of you might remember that film, but just as a little memory jogger, here's a small clip from the trailer.
In Blake Edwards, 10, a fantasy fulfilled for adults who can count.
Now, I did a bit of research and I did find that the film 10 screened at the Tower Cinemas from the 24th of January to the 20th of March, 1980. The evening session times were 5 p.m. and 8 p.m, so she most likely was at one of those sessions if she got off the bus at night. Now, if she went to the 5 p.m. session, it probably would not have been until after 8 p.m. that she would have got off the bus at Gateshead. But if it was the 8 p.m. session, then it would have been fairly late at night and I'd imagine not till after 11 p.m. sometime. Now, going back to the article, there is a photo with the caption, "The Newcastle CBD at about the time of the attempted abduction." Now, I can recognise this photo as looking west along Hunter Street from near the Derby Street intersection. And I thought it was a little odd that there was no traffic, but I did notice also that the traffic lights weren't on and there did seem to be some barricading in the background. And so I thought it may have been taken at the end of 1989 because that's the only time I can really recall that sort of thing would have happened, because at the end of 1989 was the Newcastle earthquake, and the Newcastle CBD was closed down for 2 weeks. I guess it could have been early 1990. Anyway, I checked the Newcastle Library photo bank, and it shows the photo listed as part of the 1989 earthquake collection. So it was actually about 10 years after the incident. The Tower Cinema isn't far from there in King Street, but yeah, it's not exactly where she went, but she may have caught the bus from near there. But anyway, that's just a little aside, and I shall go back to the article. The bus normally would have stopped opposite her home, according to the facts tendered in court. On this occasion, the bus did not go down the hill on her road, dropping her 500 metres from her house, the document stated. The street was dark, with lights off in most of the houses on the street. So I'm thinking it probably was the 8 p.m. session if most of the houses didn't have lights on. And yeah, because she probably would have got back well after 11 p.m. And I imagine that's when the incident would have occurred. Minutes later, Warren McCorriston approached in a car. The facts stated that as the girl walked down the street, a red hatchback approached and pulled up in front of her. The victim walked towards her house and started to hear footsteps from behind her, the document said. She turned to see the offender running towards her and was grabbed from behind by the offender at the waist. Now, this next photo of a bus is actually at the University of Newcastle, which is over 10 kilometres from Gateshead. So, apart from it being a bus, it's probably and not really as relevant, particularly since it's a more recent photo of a bus, not one from 45 years ago. But anyway, I digress. The court documents said Warren McCorriston held her tight and said, "Come with me." The victim started screaming and the offender said, "I have a knife," the facts stated. At no point during the incident did the victim see a knife. Warren McCorriston turned the teenager around and pushed her back up the hill towards his car. The victim kept screaming and fighting, and Warren McCorriston eventually let her go, the document stated. The police facts said the victim ran and hid in the front yard of a nearby home before Warren McCorriston stopped in his car and stared at her. She stood her ground, and Warren McCorriston then drove off. Prosecutors said Warren McCorriston admitted he planned to sexually assault the girl. The Crown contends, and the offender accepts, that his intention was to force her into his car so that he could seek to have sexual contact with her, the facts said. This intention was thwarted by her actions in resisting him. Now, I did find it a little surprising he admitted that, as I expected, or you would expect, his intentions would be hard to prove other than him admitting it. Perhaps he does regret his past behaviour and is trying to clear his conscience. Hopefully that's the case, but we can only hope. Now, the next photo here has the caption, "The girl was approached by Warren McCorriston on Cadaga Road, Gateshead." Now, I do recognise that photo as being at the top of Cadaga Road, and it's a fairly recent one, and it's the top of Cadaga Road near Warners Bay Road. Now, from my knowledge of the bus routes at the time and hills in the area, then assuming the details in the article are correct, then I would expect this is actually close to where she probably got off the bus. Anyway, continuing. The girl told close friends of the incident at the time, but did not report Warren McCorriston to police until 2023. So that's 43 years later. This occurred when the victim was watching a television show about an unsolved disappearance, and that would have been Gordana Katevsky from other reports. The police facts said. She rang Crime Stoppers after watching the television program. She also identified a picture of the offender. Another charge of detained for advantage will be taken into account during sentencing, as will a charge of assault occasioning actual bodily harm. Warren McCorriston faces up to 14 years in prison for the attempted kidnapping. He remains on bail and is due to be sentenced in Newcastle District Court on June 19. The Australian had a good report on the 20th of June 2025, giving background information as well as covering the June 19 hearing. But I'll start from about halfway through the article, as that's the most relevant bits that aren't covered elsewhere. Separate to his New South Wales offences, he has also been charged with sex offences against 4 Queensland women in 2019, when he was aged in his late 50s, or more specifically around 58. Those charges relate to McCorriston allegedly procuring sex acts from women through false pretences after meeting them online, and of raping one woman who has since taken her own life. The Queensland charges will be mentioned in Southport Magistrates Court again next month. Now, I'm recording this on the 24th of July 2025, and I did see on the NBN Television news tonight that he did have an appearance in Southport Court today, and those were the charges being considered. But the NBN news report didn't really provide much more detail than that to say that, yep, they were those charges that had been suspended since he was arrested in 2020 for the New South Wales crimes. I would also note that I have found there was a hearing on the 19th of June at Southport Court, and I suspect in combination with the 27th of February hearing that I reported on before in the last video, that they probably both are related to those sex offences in Queensland. So the article continues, currently on bail on the abduction offence. He arrived at the District Court in Newcastle on Thursday in a suit and tie and flanked by supporters. His defence barrister presented a picture of a reformed man. Ben Bickford said none of his submissions were intended to downplay the seriousness of this offence, or how frightening the event must have been for the victim. However, McCorriston was a young man at the time, and he appeared to have a distorted view of the world and relationships. In part, it seems, at least according to the psychologist, because of the modelling that he was exposed to by his dysfunctional and abusive father. A forensic psychologist explored those issues, and McCorriston was also undergoing counselling, Mr. Bickford said. It appears to be the second offence in time on Mr. McCorriston's criminal history. Well, that's at least that we know of. A degree of leniency would have been afforded to him had he been sentenced a very long time ago, he added. He added, the long delay before prosecution has enabled him to establish, right up until today, very positive and proactive steps towards his effective rehabilitation. With the help of programs and education and therapy, Mr. McCorriston's attitude towards his past conduct has evolved since his last sentence. Mr. McCorriston is not someone who is justifying his behaviour or trying to blame his youth. Rather, he's trying to contextualise the offence by understanding how immature and perhaps warped his way of thinking was when he was a much younger man. Paul Maher, for the prosecution, told the court there were a number of outstanding allegations that the offender is yet to face in Queensland, which I discussed and probably should say they're not proven yet. McCorriston served sentences in Queensland and New South Wales at 22 and 23 for unrelated matters of car stealing and fraud, he said. I did mention these offences in a previous video, but I did not know when they occurred. Now, from this information, it would appear they occurred in the period 1982 to 1984. So it appears he was already establishing a connection to Queensland at the time. Though I am surprised he was able to achieve such high-level executive positions with even just that criminal history. He was, by the age of 20, a person who ultimately was convicted for very, very serious allegations of maliciously inflicting bodily harm within a domestic relationship, Mr. Maher said. I'm assuming that's related to his conviction in 2021 for those historic offences between about 1980 and 1997. Anyway, yeah, so Mr. Maher said that. Judge Timothy Gartleman will sentence McCorriston next week. Okay, so with that, I'll go back to the page 7 article in the Gold Coast Bulletin on the 27th of June, 2025. Ex-Q1 boss admits teen abduction attempt by Clarice Packer. A teenager was 500 metres from her house when she turned to see a man running towards her in a terrifying attempted abduction, with the cold case closed more than 40 years later. Former Gold Coast body corporate boss Warren John McCorriston was arrested in January 2024, the 15th of January to be precise, over the attempted abduction of a teenage girl in New South Wales Lake Macquarie region in 1980. Now, the article goes over the details of the incident, but does have some additional information, so I will continue with that and not skip it. The New South Wales District Court was told how the girl had caught the bus home after seeing a movie with her boyfriend on that night 45 years ago. So she wasn't alone when she was out, but yeah, just that brief walk back to her home, but she was expecting the bus to drop her right out the front, but fortunately that didn't happen. Her boyfriend got off before her and the bus dropped her 500 metres from her home. The street was dark. As she walked out, a car pulled in front of her, Judge Timothy Gartleman told a sentence hearing on Thursday. Walking past the car, she heard footsteps behind her and turned to see McCorriston running towards her. She tried to run, but he grabbed her from behind and held her tight around her waist, telling her to go with him. When she screamed, he threatened her by saying he had a knife. She couldn't see one, and there was no evidence he did. But the threat of it must have terrified her, Judge Gartleman said. McCorriston kept asking her to go to his car, telling her he just wanted her to come to the car. He didn't want to do anything but sit in the car and talk. It was agreed he was trying to force her into the car so he could have sex with her. McCorriston, then 18, eventually let her go and she ran towards her house before stopping short. She didn't want him to see where she lived, which seems like a smart idea. He drove away before a U-turn, staring towards her after she crossed the road. The court heard she didn't tell her father, as she thought she wouldn't be allowed out again. So, yeah, that would be a young girl's thinking, I would assume. She told some friends, but didn't report it to the police until 2023, 40 years after the attempted abduction, after a TV show on a girl who'd gone missing in the mid-1990s, and that being Gordana Katevsky, who was kidnapped at Charlestown on the 24th of November 1994 by persons who are still unknown, and she was never seen again. Continuing, she identified McCorriston from a series of photographs, including one of McCorriston in the mid-1980s. Now, the 20th of June 2025 article in The Australian says they were black and white photographs of 20 people. So to me, this is all good because a lot of the photos and videos that we've seen of him in the media over the last 5 or 6 years have all been fairly recent, at least within probably about the last 10 years or so at most. So I would expect a mid-1980s photo would look very similar to what he would have looked in 1980, and if she could remember him well, then she would easily pick him from that. And with them showing 20 others, or being among 20 photos, then yeah. Okay, the court was told McCorriston, now 64, a former body corporate manager of the Gold Coast Q1 apartment tower, initially didn't remember attempting to abduct the teenager, with a psychologist noting he came to accept he committed the offences after reading evidence. He pleaded guilty to assault occasioning actual bodily harm, detained for advantage, and cause injury to victim, and detained for advantage without causing injury to victim. Now, the last two seem to contradict each other, unless it's thought he made two attempts to detain her during the incident, in which one attempt injured her. But since all other reports I have seen indicate he only pleaded guilty to the last one, the other two may have been reported incorrectly, but it's possible he admitted to that charge of detaining for advantage without injury, but perhaps he didn't admit to the other two, but they would be taken into account while sentencing. Yeah, so perhaps he's only being sentenced for the one charge, but the other two are being considered in determining that. So that's another possibility, but anyway, I'll continue. It may not be the case. Continuing, the psychologist reported McCorriston had said therapy helped him understand the trauma he'd caused, and he expressed guilt and remorse. But sentence assessment report note said he'd initially tried to justify the offence by saying his father's negative example had influenced him. The court heard McCorriston had been convicted of sexual and violent offences in the early 1980s and late 1990s. So those were the offences he was charged with in January 2020 and convicted in 2021. Judge Gartleman said McCorriston's likelihood of reoffending appeared low to moderate. McCorriston was jailed for 2 years and 3 months with a non-parole period of 15 months. But he was in custody for other offences at the time of his arrest, with Judge Gartleman ruling McCorriston had already served the non-parole period. He directed McCorriston to attend the registry to authorise release on Thursday morning. His sentence has 12 months remaining, expiring on February 7. Now, on reading that, I felt the maths didn't quite make sense, as I would expect that normally this sentence would apply from the day he was arrested or charged, which was the 15th of January 2024. So I would have expected his sentence to have ended on the 14th of April 2026, and that he would not have been eligible for parole until the 14th of April this year. But he was released on bail in February, so I would have thought there would be about 2 more months to serve. Anyway, I did get a bit of an explanation from the Daily Telegraph article on the 27th of June 2025, and might seem a little complicated, but it does make a little bit more sense. So it says, sex offender avoids further jail time for attempted rape, by Dan Proudman. Now, I often found Dan Proudman's articles to be pretty good, so recommend those articles. Anyway, Newcastle District Court Judge Tim Gartleman, SC, found Warren John McCorriston, now aged 64, would have already served a non-parole period for the Lake Macquarie kidnapping charge if he had been sentenced at the same time as offences against 3 other women, which occurred between 1980 and 1999. So in other words, it seems the judge is considering calculating what sentence would have been if it had been assessed at the same time as those other offences rather than being considered separately now. McCorriston remains on parole for those offences after being sentenced in 2021 to a maximum of 8.5 years jail with a non-parole period of 4.5 years. That non-parole period expired on July 7 last year, 2024. But McCorriston remained in custody on the fresh charge until he successfully applied for bail and was then granted parole in February this year. So in other words, on the same day in February, he was bailed for the 1980 offences and was paroled for the offences he was sentenced for in 2021. Judge Gartleman sentenced McCorriston to a maximum of 27 months in jail on the charge of detaining for advantage without causing an injury to the victim, with a 15-month non-parole period. Using the principle of totality, now I did look it up, and basically my understanding of the principle of totality is that the judge imposes a sentence that reflects the overall criminality of the offences lumped together, rather than simply adding up the sentence for each offence. The basic idea being that the overall punishment is appropriate and not excessive. And so that seems to be the principle he's using there. Using the principle of totality, where McCorriston's sentence for the abduction charge would have been partially taken up in the sentence for the other historical offences if it had been part of those court proceedings, Judge Gartleman backdated his sentence on the fresh charge to November 8, 2023, which is more than 2 months before he was charged. It meant that the 15-month non-parole period for the abduction charge expired on February 7, 6 days before McCorriston was released on parole for the offences against the 3 other women, this being February 13. So basically saying he spent 6 days in jail, more in jail than he needed to, I guess. I am unaware of the date November 8, 2023 having any particular meaning. I could be wrong, but I assume it may have just been selected because that date would mean that Warren McCorriston would not need to go back to jail as long as parole on the new convictions is to be served with the other offences for which he is already on parole. So I hope that makes some sort of sense. Okay, so also on the 27th of June 2025, the Newcastle Herald added to that. He was released on bail that day and will remain at liberty, but on parole until February 7, 2026. Now, of course, that is only for the attempted abduction charge from 1980, but he will still be on parole for the other offences until the 7th of July, 2028. Though, if he is convicted of the alleged 2019 sex offences in Queensland, he may end up in a Queensland jail before then. But I'm not sure how it legally works in practice, especially with interstate jurisdictions, which may complicate things. But anyway. But before I finish up, I will go back to an earlier article that was in the Newcastle News, published on June 19, 2025. I won't read it all, but the article includes details of Warren McCorriston's bail and parole conditions, as well as the suppression conditions placed on the media in relation to this case. Rapist Centre of More Interstate Allegations Court by Dan Proudman. Again, McCorriston can again be formally identified as a sex offender after an order prohibiting the publication of his identity was lifted, almost 6 months after multiple news organisations were also ordered to remove a long series of articles about him dating back more than 5 years. So that seems significant and explains why I was unable to see anything in the media for a while. The now 64-year-old has been set for a fresh trial this year for the attempted abduction of the 16-year-old girl in Newcastle in 1980, before he decided to plead guilty to one count of detaining for advantage without causing injury to the victim. Judge Gartelman, SC, heard that McCorriston could have been released on parole last July and had spent over 200 extra days in jail, 221 if you want to be exact, before he was finally released in February this year, as he was granted bail on the fresh allegations and a formal parole hearing. Barrister Ben Bickford for McCorriston also submitted that while he did not wish to downplay the seriousness of the offence, there were a series of reasons why his client should not face any more full-time imprisonment for the latest charge. They included McCorriston's youth at the time. He was aged 18 when he told the girl he was armed with a knife and she should get into the car. And there was evidence McCorriston had recognised he had possessed a distorted view of the world due to a dysfunctional childhood. The court also heard the allegation was not a significantly grave example of the abduction charge. McCorriston had undergone significant rehabilitation for his crimes while in jail, and that he had shown remorse. McCorriston was also serving a quasi-custody sentence while in the community because of his onerous parole conditions, including electronic monitoring and a curfew, which will continue until his head sentence ends in 2028. But the Crown prosecutor submitted that McCorriston's rehabilitation was still a work in progress, and there remained outstanding allegations which McCorriston had yet to face in Queensland, dating back to when he was in his 50s. So it's more like late 50s, about 58, as I said before. The Crown said McCorriston's behaviour, where he had told the girl, "I have a knife, get in my car, I want to talk," had had such a significant impact on the victim that she was still able to pick him out of a photographic list of 20 suspects some 43 years later. And the prosecutor added that McCorriston only desisted or stopped trying to abduct the girl when she began to scream and ran off. He pleaded guilty in 2021 to 5 charges involving the 3 women and was jailed for 8 years and 6 months, with a non-parole period of 4 years and 6 months. So that's the 3 women he violently assaulted in the 1980s and 90s. McCorriston was released on parole on February 13 this year after the state did not oppose his release. His parole hearing heard he had completed the program pathway in custody, accepted responsibility for his offending, and would continue to see a psychologist and access therapeutic interventions in the community. McCorriston was due to be housed at a facility run by Corrective Services New South Wales and under the supervision of corrections personnel. He was the subject to mandatory electronic monitoring and had to provide daily activity schedules. The parole release also involved a list of conditions, including not contacting the victims, which I wouldn't see he'd have any need to, an alcohol and gambling ban, and to not visit the Lake Macquarie local government area unless he was travelling to and from court in Newcastle. His parole on the charges in relation to the 3 women was not due to expire until July 7, 2028. Okay, so to summarise all that, so on the 15th of January 2024, Warren McCorriston was charged with the 1980 attempted abduction of a 16-year-old girl at Gateshead. On the 7th of July 2024, he was eligible for parole for the sex assaults he was convicted of in 2021 for those offences in the 1980s and 90s. On the 13th of February 2025, which was 221 days later, he was paroled for his 2021 conviction and released on bail for the 1980 offences. But it was with very strict conditions, which included electronic monitoring and a curfew, providing daily activity schedules, housing and supervision provided by corrective services, not contacting victims, an alcohol and gambling ban, and not to visit the Lake Macquarie local government area, and only allowed to travel through there when attending Newcastle Court. Then a couple of months later, in April 2025, he pleaded guilty to the 1980 offence, and that avoided the trial that was due to occur in mid-May. So that saved the victim from having to go through it all in court again. Then on June 19 and 26 in 2025, so about a month ago, that was his sentence hearings. And he was sentenced to 2 years and 3 months jail with a non-parole period of 1 year, 3 months, backdated to the 8th of November 2023. And he was immediately paroled. The Queensland charges have commenced, and for the alleged 2019 sexual offences against women, including the rape of one who has since committed suicide. If proven, Warren McCorriston may end up in a Queensland jail before his parole ends. He has been undergoing counselling and rehabilitation, but considered still a work in progress, but with a low to moderate probability of reoffending. It is considered he feels guilty and remorseful for his past behaviour and may be related to his dysfunctional upbringing and abusive father. Now, I found it surprising he didn't remember the 1980 offence, but accepts and believes he did do it. It kind of implies he thought it normal, or it may have been one of a number of offences or attempted abductions he committed, and that might be why he didn't remember that particular one. I've also had another thought that around that time his mind may have simply just been more focused on the attempted rape charge, which was acquitted in 1981. So that occurred pretty much the same time as that offence. But since he was acquitted, it's only an allegation and not proven. Anyway, I hope he truly does feel guilt and remorse. And if he does have any direct or indirect knowledge of any of the girls who disappeared, that his conscience will lead him to reveal what he knows. And it may not necessarily mean he was directly involved in those offences or even indirectly, but he may have knowledge. He may know nothing, but I do note that when Amanda Robinson disappeared near Swansea Bowling Club, it's believed he and several other known sex offenders who were part of the Scouts, and those other sex offenders were Scout leaders, that they were at Swansea Bowling Club that night. And other factors are that he and those other sex offenders were living at Belmont in the same area at the time, and Belmont also had links with Robin Hickey and Leanne Goodall, who disappeared in the same 4-month period from the 30th of December 1978 to the 20th of April 1979. Anyway, this has been a fairly long video, so I'll leave it there. I hope you found it informative and interesting. And if you'd like to see more of my videos, you know what to do. Subscribe and click on the bell. And if you'd like to support me to make more videos, you can do so at Patreon. I'm David A. Elliott. Have a good one, and see you around like a ristle.